For more on this, let's bring in Scott Lucas. He joins us now from Birmingham in the UK. He's a professor of international politics over at Birmingham University. Scott, always a pleasure to have you on the NewsHour. I want to begin with you by taking perhaps a different angle on this story. The perception is, I understand it, this is a manufactured crisis by Belarus in retaliation to the heavy sanctions imposed by the EU. I get that. But what about Russia's role? I mean, does it have a role in this at all? President Putin has come out and denied any involvement whatsoever.
Well, President Putin would say that, wouldn't he? Russia has a central role in creating this crisis, or exploiting it, I should say. We know that Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarus president, has serious internal issues, that he is trying to cling on to power, that he repressed the protest after his manufactured election last year, with many thousands detained. But we know that Russia has provided the essential support through Putin to try to maintain Lukashenko's domestic position and, in this case now, to put pressure on the EU. Just before these migrants were brought in from the Middle East, just before flights doubled from the Middle East, Lukashenko met Putin. They had a discussion which included the Belarus situation and the evidence of the flights being organized in particular out of Syria, where Russia is the dominant power, shows that the Russians have had a role in this. Why? Because it is an attempt to get the EU to back off of Lukashenko, not just the latest sanctions, but in general, to stop bringing up Lukashenko's internal repression, something that would suit Lukashenko, but of course suit Vladimir Putin, who has his own domestic issues and wants the EU to lift sanctions on him as well.
I understand the essential support provided by Russia to the Belarusian regime, but we are also seeing a significant military buildup near Russia's borders, not only in the northwest, but also in the south near Ukraine. How does this sort of play into the whole geopolitics of the region in terms of perhaps destabilizing the European Union, undermining NATO dominance in the area?
Yes, so let's get the timeline of events correct. Earlier this year, Russia moved a significant amount of military forces in the name of exercises towards the Ukraine border, where, of course, it has been supporting separatists in eastern Ukraine for years, and indeed has had special forces on the ground for years in that country. At that point, NATO members offered support to Ukraine, and Russia backed off. But in recent weeks, the Russians have again moved thousands of troops to the Ukraine border, not to invade, we're not talking about war at this point, but to put pressure, to see how far they could go. In response to that, NATO has again offered support to the Ukraine. There have been some movement of forces by individual countries like the UK to Poland. In other words, not directly into eastern Ukraine, but near the area to say, look, a line has to be drawn in terms of this Russian military buildup, because what we're talking about here is hybrid warfare. We're not talking about war in Eastern Europe through military confrontation, but through a combination of cyber operations, military moves, and exploiting the refugee crisis. Because at the end of the day, the Achilles heel for Lukashenko is he's not really well liked within his country. For Vladimir Putin, it's the Russian economy.
Okay. We often debate the effectiveness of sanctions that are imposed by particular bodies on other countries or regimes. In this case, we're seeing a fresh round of sanctions imposed by the European Union on Minsk. Not only that, but here's an interesting thing. The Germans are actually withholding sort of the final approval or final certification of the Nord Stream 2 gas line project that basically pumps in much needed gas, Russian gas into Europe. Will this have any effect?
Yes, it does. And you're absolutely right to focus on Nord Stream here. This is not just a technical issue. There has been pressure on Nord Stream as it neared completion, you'll know, from the US administration of Joe Biden, who very specifically before and during the Geneva summit with Vladimir Putin flagged to the Europeans, we don't want this project to go ahead because Putin will exploit it for political ends. Now, what we're seeing here is that Nord Stream is connected to attempted exploitation, not for political ends, not just with Ukraine, not just with Belarus, but also Russian pressure, for example, on the Baltic states. And so what Putin has done is he's taken a gamble. He said, look, they're not going to follow through. They'll need this oil and gas. They'll need this gas too much to cancel the contract or to suspend it. And the Germans have pushed back and said, look, we don't necessarily need Russian gas at this point if you're going to try to use it as leverage against us. And that German move will not have occurred on its own. It will have occurred after discussions with other European states and with the Americans.
Scott Lucas, great having you on. Always appreciate your insight and analysis. Thank you.